Hi, Diamond. Good to meet you and chat with you. And we're going to find out a lot about your work, in particular, human design, the gene keys, and the work that you do on empowering people, but in particular, how your work is sort of expanding and evolving. So I'd love to hand it over to you to find out and let people who are tapping in listening more about who you are and the more about the human design and the gene keys, and then what sort of led you to that point. So over to you.
Thanks, Mel. Hi, I'm so honored to be here with you and our listeners today because human design is my life. Gene Keys is probably like second life, but human design is my life. And it's one of those things that when I found it just made everything make sense.
Mm,
And I was like, if I'm having this much clarity just because I have this language now to give meaning to these things, then everyone should know about this. And I quickly learned there were people who were the right people for me to talk to and nerd out about human design. And there were some people who weren't ready. And so that's where I am now, is just figuring out who those people are who are ready for transformation, who are ready to really grab their life, grab their story, and take hold of it back. Because so many of us, we've learned to be someone who we're not.
mm.
We are living a life and we're exerting a lot of energy trying to be who we were told to be.
I love that you say that actually, because one of the biggest aspects of my work for over 20 years of working in mental health and well-being and experiencing depression and anxiety myself over the years is that there's a lot of energy that goes into suppressing the facets of ourselves, whether we call it the shadow or just those parts of ourselves that we struggle to really just share and shine, well, let alone shine, but just share. And those parts of ourselves that are kind of, as a kid, were innate, but because of conditioning, whether it's where we grew up, our family, about what was okay and acceptable, we've kind of put somewhere. And over time, and I've seen this in my practice, especially when somebody really needs to start waking up to kind of what's going on for them and are they really happy, they need to start asking what the depression and anxiety is actually telling them. And one of the reasons that I wanted to meet with you today is, as we discussed earlier, is I really like the human design approach. When I learned it, it did that. It helped me make more sense than I'd probably made, and along with the gene keys, out of all of the different psychological tools I'd come across in the last 20 years. And there was a few aha moments in there that made such sense, that said, yes, this is me. This is uniquely me, because even though we might share some facets, there is lots of sorts of diversions within that. So what I'd love to know, because we're familiar with it, is what is it? What is the human design? What does it do? And the same as the gene keys, for those that have never come across it.
Yeah, for sure. So human design is a hodgepodge, right? I'm going to layman's terms. Human design is a hodgepodge of a bunch of different systems and tools. You can think the chakra model, astrology, quantum physics, they all compile into this one tool that we call your chart or your design or your soul curriculum. It has lots of names. And what it does is it shows you how your energy flows. It shows you what gifts your soul chose to welcome in and to fulfill your life purpose, your soul purpose here in this lifetime. And so you can use this tool to actually help reclaim the story of who you truly are. Because from the time that we were born, we were in our parents' energetic aura field. And there in human design, there's a time, I'm pretty sure in Gene Keys too, there's a term that we call conditioning.
Yeah.
And that's just from just taking on stuff from your external environment. And in quantum human design, we even start to look at ancestral stuff that
Mm.
may not even be from this lifetime that might be playing a role. And so, though that stuff that we carry, especially in centers where we're open and we just take in so much from our environment, it becomes hard to figure out, well, what do I believe? What is certain? Because and so we cling to what's certain. And usually a lot of times that's our family. It's what they're saying. It's
Mm,
what they've learned about the world, whether it's jaded or good or whatever. They're teaching us what they know. And then we hold on to those beliefs, which sometimes may not serve us. Sometimes what
mm,
our parents learned for them is actually not a limitation that's for us. And so you get to use this as a tool to help you figure out, well, what's the stuff that actually is mine? What's the stuff that's not? And how can I change the story that I'm telling myself so that I can be well? So many
mm,
of us are walking around and we're unwell and we're comfortable being uncomfortable. And so
mm,
this is a way to shift that and to really truly I don't like to say happy all the time because that's a construct, but depending on your energy type, there is language. And so for me as a generator, it's satisfaction. That's what
mm,
I go for now is satisfaction. And so that's human design. Gene Keys takes a closer look at the Chinese I Ching part of
mhm,
human design, as well as the quantum physics piece, because it looks at, there are 64 gates in human design, there are 64 gene keys. So there is that correlation there. Gene keys, I find, the biggest difference is human design is very practical. It's very archetypes, this is how. And Gene Keys is very much for the one who wants to contemplate a little bit more, especially when we start getting into these ancestral things, the way we show up in relationship, karma, dharma, those sorts of things. So it really gives you language to laser focus, pinpoint what is it that is my shadow that I could, transform into a gift. Where is it that I am I love the way they term it. Where is it that I'm not letting in love? Where is it
mm.
that I'm choosing fear? Where is it that I'm choosing something that actually, there could be a shift there. And it gives some language and some meditations and some lots of things to build into this contemplation to help you shift those stories as well.
Yeah, brilliant. And it's interesting to know sort of the parallels, but I guess like the gene keys, having the idea each key has a shadow, a gift, and a siddhi. And I know that with a lot of the conversations that I have with people that I've worked with, a lot of psychotherapy now has been looked at. You can't just look at the past, you can't just look at what's impacting and how you story it. And often the way we story it is through the language that's been available to us and through the conditioned lens. And this helps us go a bit deeper into, okay, what the things like what you said we might personally struggle with. And I certainly know I dive in and out of it because it's a dense book, isn't it? So I dive in and out of a key every so often. And in particular, there was one key that made me realize that my depression wasn't always depression, because I also can be, and I can't remember what key it is, but sometimes the depression turns into frenetic. And I can be really frenetic and on the go, and it's not really energy, it's something else that's happening. And really, it's that times I have to draw back and go, right, okay, this is a sign now. I need to slow down because I'm tipping over. And if I don't, I'll wear myself out, because it's about the energy flow again, isn't it? And life being in balance, and have some rest. And we are so used to being on the go and going from one thing to the next. And that's why I love teaching the yoga and meditation, because if we go, 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 we've got to learn to go into that stillness. But there's so much packed into that, the idea of how we're influenced by our ancestors, and how some of the unfinished business from those generations that still permeate through our families, or how a lot of people are breaking the chains in their family lineage now. And certainly, I've been doing that for the female side in my family, about becoming more empowered and independent and financially free out of a system that keeps you, oppressed and in jobs that you think is the only thing you can do because that's all you've been able to do.
I love this, and I love that you've been doing this work because this is where so in quantum human design, there are 4 levels. that you can certify in. And then there are these specialty programs. And so I took a break from level 3 to
Mhm.
dive into family coaching. And so this is one of the reasons why I chose it, is because I knew there were some things that I needed to reparent in myself. And also I have a 7-year-old. So, so I was like, this is the best of both worlds. I'm going to get some parenting insight. I'm going to learn some things about me. And have I ever, I think just this morning, I'm only about 40% into the course, and I've been having these ancestral ahas and making sense of things that people haven't been able to make sense of in my family. So my mom, she she has always had this thing with my grandparents. They're no longer with us. And my mom is kind of estranged to the family. And so my aunt, the one that I was telling you about before we started chatting on record, they're 25 years apart. They had my grandparents had my mom when they were 40. And so my aunt
Mhm.
was already 25. And so, my aunt grew up with my grandmother when she was young and vibrant and did all of these things and would let her do stuff. And I guess, especially conditioning, they were manifestors, life being hard. Like they just, in their old age, they just were burnt out. When I look
Mhm.
at the narrative there, they were manifestors who are here to create and initiate and catalyze people, and they weren't allowed to their
Yeah.
whole life. And then they have this surprise baby who is a manifesting generator, you can
Mhm.
relate, who has all of this energy, who has all of these goals, and they don't want her to go out in the world and to get hurt the way that they were. So
Oh,
they
wow.
they 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 parent in that way. She has these dreams. No, get a government job, right? No, stick to the thing that works. No, this is what the status quo says you have to do. And so her whole life she's had these parents who, and she would talk about this with my aunt, and by the time I came around, they were, old. So they weren't doing much anyway. So I never understood the dynamic of why she
Mhm.
didn't like them so much, because they were always kind to me. And from what my aunt would say, and just recently, I'm like, now I get it. You literally have so much energy in your chart that supports you going out and exploring and creating and being
Wow.
able to sustain multiple passions. And
Yeah.
they wouldn't even let you pick one because they were like, do the safe thing. No, don't do that. And
Yeah.
some of that carried over into me. But I'm breaking generational things too. So
But it's wow, that's really amazed me actually, because so many people have that kind of story, don't they, where you do what your parents thought was the right thing for you to do to survive, because humanity on a large scale in lots of different ways have had to survive. If I look back at my own northern history in the UK, um, going back, my mum was a single parent, so I grew up with a single parent, and we don't quite know the history of my mum's upbringing. We know there was something, but there was a lot of secrets in that generation. And I know when I look at my mum, and I know she did really well considering her background and how harsh it was, but I knew she would have made an amazing nurse or detective, or, or something. And I know in some way she gave to people in those ways. She used that in some way. But circumstances, because it's not just about the individual, and that's the other thing about the gene keys I like. It's the individual, but the society we're in, and the limitations and the oppression that happens in those different societies about what we think we can go for, what we believe is possible, what the safe thing is to do, because of fear is being used as a control so much throughout all the different generations. And then being able to aspire and take those leaps and move beyond that, as you clearly are doing, because your energy is open and it's vibrant and it's seeing all those different connections. And in a way, that's why the work that I do around empowering women is not so much because it's a male and female thing, but I know my female generations have only two choices. They either worked in the factories and got married, or worked in the factory and then got married. And if
yeah,
you were lucky, you might have access, but there wasn't the access, there wasn't the mindset. And it's this combination, and one of the things that I do get upset about sometimes when I listen to a lot of the personal development stuff in psychology, is to make it sound like, anybody can access this, and if you just change your mind and change your frame, because actually it is individual, society, and all those other elements are operating. But I also think that we're at a time in history where more people can start to move forward and open up and challenge, as you say, the potentially outdated beliefs and ideas that they have about themselves and who they think they are. Because I don't know about you, but my generation, when I was growing up, I kind of knew that I didn't want to work in a shop or a factory. I knew that I didn't want to stay around, but I didn't know anything else. We didn't have a car. We never went on holiday. But I kind of just, there's something in you that just knows that that's not for you. And then luckily I had just doors opened up in strange ways, and not everyone can do that. And partly it's the door of the mind, or it's the actual physical door.
Yeah, it's interesting, just these stories that we tell ourselves, and it's with all of the uncertainty that is in our external environment. Like, you're in the UK, but I'm in the US. I don't know if our news makes it over there. I feel like sometimes it does.
Oh yes,
but
it does. Yeah.
but like, even with what we're going through right now, with people losing their jobs on such a high scale,
Yeah.
there's so much outside craziness and noise, and you're like, that's why I like the Gene Keys. And I think it's really the combination of both, or whatever helps you gain that awareness. Because I know for some people it's not these tools, but the more that you can stay internally grounded and aware and assured, and honestly reparent yourself, is what I'm finding out, because you were parented out of who you actually are, and the more you reparent to who you truly are, like, it's able to really hold the stake in the ground that the outside doesn't bother you as much. I am around so many people who talk about the news as if it is happening in their apartment right now all the time, and I'm like, it's a choice to cut the TV on. It's
Yeah.
it's a choice to know that they only talk about bad stuff on the news, and to continue to sit there for hours and listen.
Digesting it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So our
But even
choices
just
are,
getting, sorry, go on.
I was just saying, so our choices are important.
Yeah, but it's knowing, because like you said, there's a proportion of people, I don't know how many, because it depends on your friendship groups and your community and who you come into contact with, as to the sort of lifestyle you have and other people have. And that level, I think when you realize that a lot of it is a distraction from the self, whether that is the news being the biggest one, and what we fear might happen, and the kind of information that's shared that we know has so many biases contained within it, and it's operational. And one of the things that when I meet people who may not even realize that, that they're so massively influenced without realizing it, is to watch this documentary on YouTube called Century of the Self. And it looks at Freud's nephew who come over to America, and he worked with the first ad men, with before it was called marketing, of how they manipulated people. And then by the time the TV came along, they'd already been practicing hypnosis on the mass population for a long time, and using these tools to test out different ideas. And the Century of the Self really goes into that, and then moves you into politics. And I was trained in hypnotherapy, so in hypnotherapy and in NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, which is where we look at the linguistics, how we language things. When you actually start to look at the language that is used, and you realize how hypnotic generalized language is, we actually use that to put people in trance in hypnosis, and it's the same language that's used with politicians, and they use very vague language in order to, where you go, relationships, education, and when we had the British government think it was about 10 years ago, when they were up for elections, the Labour and the Conservatives, and Labour were like, education, education. And everyone's going, yeah, we need more education. I was like, what does that mean? What are they going to do? Because nobody asks, what's it mean? They don't say, does this mean you're going to build more schools? Does it mean you're going to put more money into schools? Does it mean you're going to create special schools to support kids who are struggling because we're seeing an increase in ADHD and ASD? What does that mean? And so all of that kind of stuff that's around us that creates a distraction, that when we start to pull ourselves away from it, it's easier to see it. But when we attach the story to it, which is a bit like Buddhist notion of, unattaching to all of these things, because these things just create a distraction for the brain, then we can start to connect with ourselves. But I find that in my work, that the fear of connecting to the self, because if for one moment you really feel what you feel, if you've not been used to feeling what you feel, that can be really scary. And that's why, in a way, we encourage people then to go to coaching, or, have something like this where you can start to say, okay, emotions are transient, they come and go. These experiences that we have to process come and go. And it was interesting you were talking about reparenting, because I worked in a school for a couple of schools for 8 years, and I used to work with a lot with the teenagers, and then I started working with the parents. And what I noticed is, and what's beautiful about what you're saying you're doing, is parents often start to have conflict with the child at the age when the parent originally went through it. And it was unfinished business, and the parent would be like, rah, they're doing this and doing that. Okay, my daughter's going out, she's behaving like this, and she's doing that, she's trying to, and we've got, okay, so you'd know that the triggers meant something much deeper. So let's examine that, and let's look at that. And that reparenting, as well as processing those early experiences that they couldn't process at that time, related to then how they were now going to deal with their teenagers. And in a way, I think that's the beautiful nature of teenagers, is they actually come along to challenge our status quo and the things that we've tried to create, that safety and security, going back to your point. We like safety and security, we don't like uncertainty.
Yeah, not just, and it's crazy because it's not just, we know this about our children, they're our greatest teachers. It's not just the teenage phase either.
Yes. True.
Um, have you done the Venus sequence yet?
I
Or
haven't.
you're
No, I know of it, but I haven't done it.
okay. Well, that's where you really start unpacking these layers of like when things get solidified. The SQ is 0 to 7, the EQ is 7 to 14,
Right.
the IQ, which is the mental defense pattern that solidifies after all of those other triggers are set, is from 14 to 21. And
Ah.
so I've been going through my own journey of unpacking those core wounds, and it's been fascinating because it's really shown up in my relationship with my partner, with Taylor. And then when I go back into the quantum human design pieces that like bring in some more ancestral things, because what I've been learning, because even there was a point in the EQ, I think it was, where it was like, who were your role models around that time? And
Yeah.
what types of things were they saying? And to be able to have human design and go back as a tool of like, because I have my grandparents' charts, then I have my mom's charts, I even have my dad's chart, but he wasn't around when I was growing up, so I don't really look at it that much when I look at this. And then my aunt who is around, and just looking at all of their language, how they are now, how that's just solidified in their being over time. And I remember I was workshopping through something that, otherwise I wouldn't have caught if I hadn't been actively contemplating it. And, the G Center in human design is the center for love, identity, and direction. And when you don't have definition in this part of your chart, you often question your lovability. And it can be very, very destabilizing for someone. Like my daughter, she has the center open in her chart. And one of the things that she'll constantly ask me, especially with her emotional authority, like she'll ask me when she feels like it, is like, do you love me? And I'm like, I tell you I love you all the time. I show you I love you all the time. why do you keep questioning this? And I have to remind myself that, I am her source for that love right now
Yeah.
until she goes out in the world. And if I have to tell her 100 times a day, right, I'm getting her to the point where she can self-assure herself, because that's a part of her Gene Keys work, right, with the 20,
Mm.
moving from that superficiality to self-assurance and presence. But looking back, my grandparents, they had undefined G centers, and they very much going through pre-civil rights movements and post, they very much questioned their lovability. And then they
Mm.
raised my mom, who has a defined G, and she has, the 10 there, which has the shadow of self-obsession, and that showed up in our relationship for sure, because I have a defined G as well. And so where the trigger started to happen was, they questioned their lovability. She didn't necessarily, she just didn't know why she couldn't be who she was. And the people
Mm.
who were closest to her telling her, because she knew who she wanted to be, she just couldn't be because of the rules. And so because she didn't have her solar plexus defined, it had a lot of emotions. People with open sacrals, which we were just talking about, they're very empathic. And so a lot
Yeah.
of times they're taking in emotions that they don't even know that that's what they're doing. And so sometimes they can have a short fuse. Sometimes
Mm.
people without emotional definition can be labeled as the emotional one because they're voicing the emotions of everything, everyone in their environment. And
Almost
so
like they do the work for everyone.
um they're not doing the work, they're just feeling it.
Okay. Yeah, good point.
Uh, but but she was, having these feelings, and then here I come, and I know who I am, and I have the feeling of like, I know that this is what I want to do, like I have emotional authority. And so one of the things that got caught was, here I was, this person who knew what I was, and I wasn't questioning it, and that was a trigger for them.
Ah,
And it's a trigger for me sometimes, for Taylor, because there are some times where I look at her and I'm like, how can you be so sure of yourself right now? Like, you were just acting up all week, and here you are asking me for things like you should just get them, like, you, right? And one of the narratives that I was able to shift and was told, it was like, look at that as a sign that the generational healing is happening.
mm.
Taylor is an example of what it looks like to just move through life and worth never, it said never, be a question. And I was like, well, yeah, that's what it looks like for sure, if you don't question whether you're worthy of things. And so it was just kind of
Yeah.
like that healing that allows, right? And it's like, whenever you see defiance now, right? I'm still going to parent it, but it's that lens of, instead of really making you wrong and shaming you and being like, why do you always talk about yourself, and creating those narratives for her, it's like, okay, yes, you're breaking generational curses. However, there are ways in which we say things and do things and operate in life. So yes.
Because it's still a challenge to be a parent, regardless of how much access we have to all these psychological models.
Yeah.
And, as you said earlier, our kids are our biggest teacher. And I said that to someone a few years ago, whether you're single or in a relationship, I've got two lads and they're in their 30s now. And we've had a lot of challenges. And actually, I think probably after this call, I may well start diving back into their charts, because there are some things that have been repeated, and what you said is, when something is repeated a lot, it's either, it can be really irritating as a parent, because you're trying to respond to that, and then you get to a point of, how come we're still having that, the record is still spinning, the same record still spinning. But actually, it's that verbalization of that process of where they're at. And there are other things that aren't repeated, where it's transient, where they just flow through it, which I actually see with my granddaughter. I've got a 4-year-old granddaughter, and I go around and see her, when I'm in this part of the UK, sort of every week. And I see her move through from the moment I pick up at nursery through these different emotions and different cycles of play and different, and I'm really enjoying it now because I'm now just receptive and responsive. I don't control or organize. I just keep a sort of safe space.
Yeah.
And will also say when I've had enough and no, I can't do anymore. And, you know, and I can see how also she tunes into everybody. And I don't know if you've come across this, but something I sort of discovered a few weeks ago with this, because as you're as fascinated with your daughter as I am with, you know, with my granddaughter, I noticed her do something, and going back to the point about parenting, because if you know, get more parents contact you to say, I really need to understand who I am and what's going on with me in my own map and my children's, to see if I can understand this behavior on a deeper level rather than me just being triggered by it. But I went to nursery to pick her up, and you know, as when you start parenting your own children, it's this process of, I don't want to parent always like the way I was parented, but I haven't quite got a blueprint. So I'm sort of fudging my way as well as I work out, what do I believe? What are my values? What are my cultural norms? All of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And we picked her up from nursery, and often I buy a little treat. And I've been conflicted. I clearly need a new project. Do I take a treat every week? Will I be setting her up for an expectation? And what is this about? You know, it's kind of ridiculous how deep it can go. But at the same time of, should we set up that expectation, and what happens if I don't? Anyway, one week I didn't. This week we picked her up, and I'd just forgotten to pick something up. And she came out and she's like, no, 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 which is lovely, you know, because we love that feeling when our children or grandchildren respond to us in that way. And I didn't have the treat, and she said, you've got a treat. And I said, I forgot to bring it. She walked over to her mum, held her mum's hand, and she's normally with me. She iced me out, right, till I got home. And it's the second time she's done it. And I was like, what's going on here? Because she's 4, you know, my brain couldn't compute. And I was just about to say to my son, is she okay? And I went to go, because she iced me out from nursery. Is this a behaviour he's seen? She knew the word before I said it, looked at me, a light bulb went on her head, and her whole behaviour shifted. It was like, I was like, you're 4 years old, you know, and even though I've, you know, studied child psychology to a level, and I know that our ideas about the world and all sorts of things are probably there before we were even born, let alone, you know, the first 2 years of life, they used to say, in terms of the blueprint and the pattern and conditioning and expectations. But it just made me think, and then I've started to wonder if is it the human design? I think she's a projector. I think what she's doing is mirroring back something that you haven't sorted out within yourself. And because a lot of grandparents go for this, I want a hug and I want a kiss, and you know, and it's about the grandparent rather than about responding to where the child's at in that moment. But it really sort of started to fascinate me and take me on another level of the journey. But again, in that moment, because you go through the different emotions in responses to the way that people around you react, don't you? Your partner, your children, your grandchildren. And it was in that moment where I felt it. And then I was like, okay, what is that? So in the past, maybe I'd, you know, might have reacted and felt the pain of that. And then you project that back out to your children. It becomes shame, it becomes guilt, it becomes something else. Does that make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. And what's really fascinating is that, so in chart speaking, our children's charts look like our parents' charts. So they may not look exactly the same, but there are elements of our parents' charts. And so there's always this reparenting that's happening, because we remind them of their parents, and then our children remind. And so it's fascinating that this dynamic is happening between a grandchild and the grandparent. And it sounds like, and this is where my one line kicks in, and I'm like, ooh, now I need to look at people's charts, because I'm like, now I want to see what's happening energetically, because I can
Yeah.
hypothesize all I want, but the scientist in me is like, I need the data.
Yeah.
But it sounds like she has emotional authority. We have already
Yes.
deduced that you have sacral authority. Whether she's a projector or not, I don't know. She might have a 5 line,
Mm,
she might have something like that. But it's very much true that she is aware of her emotions and how they
yes.
affect people around her. And
Yeah.
so it's very possible that because she can maybe sense that you don't have definition there, she's like, oh, I'm really gonna make Nana feel this right now because she has disappointed me. And so I would be curious, because if she is a projector, then that not self is bitterness. And so there could be that
Yes.
dynamic happening there. There's also in family coaching these mistaken motivations, and the acronym is PAIR. And so when someone and it's about how it makes you feel. So if you feel like you need to overpower them, they
Mm.
are needing power. If you
Oh,
feel like, they are annoying you and just irritating you, then they need attention. If
yes,
you
yeah.
are, yeah, if you are pitying them, then they are feeling inadequate. And the R is like the most extreme version. If all of those haven't been met in a minute, then if there's this revenge dynamic happening, then that's like the most extreme point of that, of energetic needs not being met. And so it's funny that you're talking about this, because it sounds almost like the power dynamic. And as my daughter is a manifesting generator with a defined will center, she very much wants a lot of power. She and it's interesting to sit and think about the dynamics, because um it really gives you the awareness to say, like, how do I parent this
Mm.
in this way, or how do I navigate this situation? She she rides the bus now at this new school, and we've been talking about I'm so glad that I learned that as emotional authority, I get to give myself permission before I discipline, because she knows how to get home from the bus stop. But she got off the bus early. They had a new bus driver, and she decides that despite it not being ever in the plan for her, she's just going to have a play date. So she walked a farther distance walk than it would have been to get home, to be at her friend's house. And she FaceTimes me from like one of the iPads or something in the house. And me and the mom have been actively planning a play date for today, actually, for today. And so I'm like, why is she FaceTiming me? That's weird. I answer, it's Taylor's face. And AJ, which is not the little boy whose house it is, but like, I'm like, what is happening right now? And she's like, the bus got here early, and so we're at Adisa's house right now. Can you tell dad to pick me up, because he was closer than I was? And I was like, yeah, I can call him. And I called dad. He's like, the bus had to be super early, because I've been here since 4:30. I saw nothing. And so I give him the address. And just yesterday, I was talking to my aunt. I was like, she knew what she was doing. Like, she knew that she doesn't have a phone. So if she made it the choice to walk to the friend's house, she would have to call when she got there. And then it would take some time for us to navigate, maneuver to that location. So she bought herself time to have a play date before the actual play date. And I think it's because, and we've been working with this, she has this issue with control sometimes. If she
Right.
doesn't think for sure, because we haven't been, we've made the play date conditional in this way of like,
Mm.
I'm setting these things up, but
Mhm.
you still have to keep your attitude in check. You need to make sure you're doing, good in school. And so for her, there's uncertainty there. And so when she
Mhm.
fears that, she tries to claim power in that way. And I'm like, that's exactly what happened there. I see you on a soul level, what you're doing. And I told her dad, I was like, I want to talk to you about something with Taylor, just so that, she doesn't feel that she has to, because thank goodness they were at somebody's house. But with the
Yeah.
wrong set of friends, they're out in the
Yeah.
street somewhere, they're lost
Yeah.
somewhere. And
Yeah.
so, like, it's one of those things where we do still need to talk about it, but it's that mistaken that power, because in that moment I was like, I need to overpower you. And I'm like, wait, hold
Yes.
on.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's what trigger is, isn't it?
Right.
And a lot of people, we're using this word and banding it around a lot now, I think, without realizing that it's not it's not a bad and good thing. It's just what we feel, and it's information, and we're getting, like you say, the motivation. And when I worked with an organization in London, we talked about human givens, as in what are the basic needs that are being met. And so her need is around creating, starting to create that for herself from her own young perspective, from her mind, clever enough, but not to the level that we see things, as parents, because we have the overview, we have the fear, and we have the happy stuff, we have the sad stuff, we know the whole picture, and we have that concern around our own children. And what is the need? And like you say, the trigger comes up and it's like, what do I do? And it's about being able to breathe in that moment and really come out of the stress mode of, first of all, because I often used to say to my staff or clients, if you're not in a crisis, if you don't have to call 911, 999, then you've got time to breathe through it, get yourself back into your cognitive faculties to be able to figure out and use the science of what you know about this child, because you can't respond to every child in the same way, and where you're at, because you have to take in all that information: age, safety, risk, resilience, their capacity to understand the world and their own competencies and all of that kind of stuff, which, if you're not used to doing it, just sort of throws you into a spin. As well as realizing, as I looked at my 4-year-old granddaughter and you're looking at your daughter, through those eyes of, oh my goodness, there's a level of smart here I'm not sure I've come across. Because each generation seems to just develop this, extra set of something. And at the same time, I find it really rewarding as well, because it's that once you're able to go through that process, and as you're talking about reparenting, feel the trigger, what has been activated in me. Okay, is it a 99911 situation? No, we can buy time, we can work out the route and how we get there, and do we go before or after traffic, and make those parenting distinctions between everything we've got going on in our lives, and then decide, because I'm aware of what patterns do I want to set up, because I'm aware of the ones, as you said, and I love that I'm glad you give me that deeper understanding around the sequence, the Venus sequence of at these different phases. Is it 0 to 7 and then 7 to the 3 stages?
Yes, 0 to 7, 7 to 14, 14 to 21.
So that fits in really with developmental psychology, like Piaget and Carl Jung talked about those phases, and how in those phases we learn about ourselves and the world. And 7 is a sort of pinnacle point, isn't it, of moving into being more aware of ourselves and other people.
Yeah.
But also I'm aware of what pattern, who do I want her to know who I am, and what pattern do I pick up, or do I work to create? Who am I? What's my identity in this family and in this situation? Because it's always evolving. She's still young. It's my son. It's a new situation. But at the same time, the energetics of it. And it was interesting you said that about the bitterness. There's an element in one of the numbers, because I saw a look in her eye. And I thought, I've noticed it. I'm not sure yet. But also, what was activated in me, because what am I working on? I was working on disappointment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Oh,
working on my own trigger to do with my own lineage, family, and this pattern that's run throughout. And I was aware of that. And I thought, this is why sometimes we end up in these situations that then a few years down the line, we wish we hadn't have set up. We wish we hadn't have set up that expectation. Because had I, the precarious nature of all of this is, had I gone with a treat every week, At some stage, someone's going to get disappointed. At some stage, someone's going to get upset with that other person. So then it's, how do you feel when your child is upset with you? How do you feel when your mother or your grandparent or your partner is upset with you? Do you placate? And going back to being a woman and our lineage of being silent and not having a voice and placating people and feeding into whatever the neurosis was in the family, because you didn't really have a choice and it wasn't safe. And actually, physically, often, unless you had your own resources of finances and house or job or something like that, couldn't leave those situations. So you had to learn to adapt to your environment. And so the beauty of the kids that are coming along now, the 20 and 30 and 40, 20 and 30-year-olds, is they've got much more autonomy and much more financial independent. And we're using language like, I want to find my meaning and purpose and and enjoy life. But the fundamentals there of how we are, who are you, who am I, what is this relationship, how does what you do influence me and affect me, and vice versa, and how do you work out what fights to fight and what to let go, and what do you want to focus on? Because once you, as you know, you go dive deep, you can really pull so much apart. And sometimes you've got to simplify it, haven't you? Like you said, you're working on that one strand potentially at a time.
Oh yeah. And it's interesting because I have to be careful because I can consume information so fast sometimes that I don't integrate it. And so what I've
Okay.
loved is just having the time to integrate, to make sense of these pieces that I'm finding and figure out. Because one of the reasons why, I'm diving so deep is because I know there's the only thing stopping me in my business at this point is me. And so it's one of those things which goes back to like what we were talking about, the three pillars and how uncertainty, like no matter if it's business, life, or in parenting or reparenting, I was at a point of uncertainty and I was like, this doesn't make sense. Like everyone's like my website and this and that. And so thankfully, as I've started to do this work, things have, and do this work and let go of control, which is a part of doing this work. But I need to call out the let go of control piece because so many
Yeah.
of us cling to it,
Yes.
that it does hold us back. And the more that you learn, the more, like for me, the more I learn, the more information that I have, it makes me feel safe. So the more
Yeah.
that I learn about these things, it's like, oh, okay. Okay. And just having the time to integrate. And even with you, this is integration.
Yes.
Some of the things that I'm bringing up here, like I've kind of thought about, and maybe I might have talked to my family about it to like see if I was like hinting around the right pieces, but this is integration. And I'm so grateful for you being in my ecosystem because you also talk about hypnotherapy, and that's been something that has intrigued me.
Thank you. It's beautiful when people come into your space, isn't it? When we first got in contact, and then I looked at your website and I thought, wow, how fascinating, because I don't know many people that are doing the human design and the gene keys, but also, as you said, around the reparenting of how, in a way, how there's a lot of things that we can do. We can get support, we can give support to people and nudge them wherever they are at the moment. Like if somebody comes to see you and they might have one or two sessions and they've got to comprehend what is a lot of information about who they are and read over that and make sense of that. And if there was one thing that I would say to everyone I've ever come in contact with, especially if they grew up in chaos, violent homes, drug and alcohol, really difficult, complex backgrounds, and in the sort of professional world, we call it adverse childhood experiences, but that chaos that creates confusion for the child. And I grew up with a lot of confusion. And it took me a long time to realize why I was studying so much was because I wanted to make sense of so much. And you talked about looking at the blueprints of the people in your family, and you mentioned your dad, and you said, you've not looked much at that. But one thing I discovered, and I think it's very important for women, young girls, of all ages, is that we need to understand that we have these people in our lives, but we also have these people we have a connection with through DNA and through an echo. Because I first met my dad when I was 8, and then I didn't see him for a long time until I was about 16, and he was an alcoholic. And I kind of knew that, so I consciously didn't create a relationship with him. But I remember when I got into my training of realizing what happens when you haven't got that male figure as a grounded sort of force in your life, and on an energetic level, even though we're talking about gender and identity, but when it comes to feminine and masculine energies, of how we have this or not have this in our life, and how it leads to a bit of distortion, like the strong independent female syndrome. Potentially, it can look good on paper, but actually many strong independent women, like what you said about I think it was your grandparents or your aunt, you can burn out by your 50s because you're struggling. It's struggle, strive, and it has a massive impact. And we saw this in the research. I used to work with public health, and a lot of the public health research into adverse childhood experiences came from America. And they started looking at, initially they were looking at obesity, and they started working with clients and realized that they were storing so much of the trauma of their own experiences from their own history, as well as the histories of their families. And they realized, and what they said is, we can have one thing happen to us and bounce back from it. We can have two things, but if we've got a constant state of struggle, we haven't got enough money, we can't pay the bills, we're going from one thing to the next, and you're carrying most of the weight for your family. You've got older parents, or you lost a lot of people when you were young, and all of this has a huge impact. And in a way, that survival psychology and that experience that is carried through the DNA and creates exhaustion. We know that in mental health and physical health, a lot of the illnesses, diseases that people get by the time they're 50 is the accumulation of the hardships and the life struggles that they've had, whether that is trauma through the relationships or domestic abuse, the big B sort of trauma, but also the knock-on effect of the drip effect of other experiences that they've had. So by the time they get 45, 50, is, even if, because I think there are some people that have got a lot of energy, a lot of power, and keep powering through. But like me, and other women, you can end up in burnout, and you're carrying all of these different things, because that's the other thing that you just do. It's not like you choose to just carry the world on your shoulder. It's just that you just do that. And those illnesses, psychological and physical, are manifestations of energetic disruption or stagnancy or patterns that, if we were able to release and let them go, would free up so much vital life force and energy that we call depression, we call anxiety, we call mental health issues. I'm in the field, and I don't advocate a lot of what is out there, so-called sort of disease models, of the way we look at things. And that's what sort of saddens me, that we learned all this stuff, but actually society's become sicker in a way. It's almost like we're reaching this pinnacle of this tsunami of people who are struggling. And I think, like what you were talking about earlier, realizing that who they thought they were was based on their conditioning. Their identity isn't even really who they are. It's just who they thought they were and who they've tried to be. And depending on how much freedom you've had within your own family, like you said, your mom didn't have that. She wasn't able to do that. And over the years, that has a psychological, physical, and a huge impact. And I think we'd save a lot of relationships if people, there's some really good relationships out there, but they can't thrive and function because the two people within them aren't thriving and functioning well. Sorry, I've just thrown loads of blur at you, but my mind goes to all this sort of, all these different facets of society that are all really interlinked. They're not separate. We're not separate. We're not like this health, this mental health, this spiritual, this really, like you said, we have to integrate all of these facets to understand ourselves and become more at peace with that, so that then we can at least emanate that and help other people understand how to also experience that, especially if you lived a life of chaos. You don't even know what that feels like. We know in childhood studies, your heart rate beats faster and harder at a resting rate if you've grown up in chaos than the average person does, because of the trauma, because of what you're carrying. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I received everything that you just said because it reminded me of two things, systems and the Chiron return. So what I'll say is the when you start talking about like certain ages of life, and I have heard like stories of people like they were so healthy, they did all these things, and at 50 they died of like a heart attack or whatever.
Mm.
And in learning more of the quantum side of things and understanding that there are these pivotal points in our human story where if we are not on course, disruption will happen, whether it's in your body or outside of your body,
Yeah.
to wake you up to, okay, I'm realizing some things. I'm kind of nervous because I'm coming up on one of those points. It's the Saturn return. It's coming up for me in
Oh, on the
April.
21st.
April the 2nd. And it's crazy because I'm like, I feel like I fixed a bunch of stuff. I feel like I course corrected. I'm gonna find out. But 50
Do you
is
want to
another.
explain to people who might not know what you've just referred to?
Okay, so in human design, there is astrology and astronomy as part of it. I haven't dove deep into the individual system, so I can't tell you. I think it's astrology. And so
Mhm.
there's the Saturn return, which apparently we have two of. One is around 28, 30. Then you have another one, I think in your 60s. I forget what the age was for that. Then you have
Yeah.
your Chiron, which is around like 45, 50, I think it is. And that's like the
The
really,
Chiron is the wounded aspect, isn't it? In your chart,
yeah, yes,
it's
you're
it's
wounded.
what wounds
Yeah.
you carry with you throughout life. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So that's the Chiron. That's like the really big halfway point. But then you've got these other points, the Saturn and things like that. And what will happen is either your body will let you know, like, hey, slow down, right? That's usually what our body is letting us know because we're always so busy doing things, and it
Yeah.
slows you down with dis-ease. It might slow you down with depression. You don't feel like you want to do anything. Nothing excites you.
Yeah.
So there are different ways, and then right, some people literally get into these life-threatening car accidents, and it's like, wow, I could have been gone. I need to do something different. And
Hmm.
um, like I said, I don't know much about like how the astrology of it works. I just know that I have one coming up, and I am aware of the date, and it's just going to be really interesting. So that was with the Chiron, because I was like, a lot of people don't know that. And
Hmm.
so if you are, right, I'm not trying to like fear monger, but like if you are coming up on one of those ages, 28 to 30, when you shift into your North Node, which is around 38, 40, your Chiron return, just see, get curious. The one thing that I love about these tools is I'm just like, just get curious, right? You may not believe in it, you may not, but just see, right? It's information. You can take it or you
Hmm.
can leave it. And then the second piece of that was the systems. And so when you're talking about things like the DSM and these other, like, it's part of the healthcare system. When we talk about, kids with ADHD and how the school curriculum doesn't work for all the kids, we're talking about the education system. We're talking
Hmm.
about all of these, right? Capitalism is a system.
Yeah.
And we are very much at a pivotal point in our society where systems are breaking. Systems that we created because we were like, things have to make sense, logic and analysis. And we're not here to, right, be hippies and take care of the planet. We're here to make money and to like all of that. Thankfully,
Yeah, the
slowly,
Pisces era, isn't it? We're
right?
moving Pisces into Aquarius. Yeah.
Right, right. So the systems are breaking, and it's the more in touch, the more in tune, the more in alignment that you are, the systems may break, but you will be fine because you will be in
Mm,
such a frequency that you are still attracting all the good despite all of the
right.
perceived bad, right? Because good and bad is a construct as well. We either learn, right? Well, we learn either way. We learn from our wins and our losses, but we should choose to look at our failures as opportunities to learn, opportunities for growth.
Yeah. And like you say, there's like the personal chart that you've got in your astrology. So for people who want their charts, I think it's astroseek.com and Cafe Astrology. You can get your chart. And even if you're not that familiar, you can see your sun sign and moon sign, and then your Chiron, and like you say, the Saturn return. And I think that astrologically, there's meant to be a lot of things happening at the moment, which are shaking things up. And 2025 is meant to be about shaking those things up. And like you said, if we can only ignore things for so long, but if we're meant to shift, if we're meant to release ourselves from a relationship or a job or something like that, something can come along. And it's something I often say to clients that, don't wait until you have an accident, to start looking after yourself and having time out and resting and not rushing from one place to the next. And at the same time, we can't just be in a place of safety. And more people have to learn how to navigate through their intuition rather than through what they're hearing and what they're seeing, because that's the other thing, is our senses are also coming online, and more people are opening themselves up and becoming more exposed to information that they weren't before through their sixth senses. And that, to somebody who likes safety, security, has maybe done the same thing for a long time, and even if there's a part of them that feels dissatisfied with what they're doing, might not do anything about it. And the other aspect of that is, even if you get your chart done and you start to see, actually, maybe my depression or anxiety or just feeling, maybe it does mean something. That the other thing I also say is, just because you've learned all that, and maybe you are actually stop lying to yourself, and you say to yourself, this isn't feeding me anymore, and this isn't giving me the joy that it once did, or I don't want to manage 10 projects at one time because I've realized that's my ego that was in operation. And I actually want to find something that I love that's at a slower pace, which I think is a massive shift people are going through now. Is that you don't have to make a decision straight away, but you can start in that process, start to map out, if in a year's time or 2 years' time you want to have left an industry, you can track backwards and say, okay, what are the steps that I need to take? Like you were talking about, you've worked on your website, you've done a lot of work so far, and you're now starting to evolve the way that you work based on your experiences and what you can offer people, so that you can feel fresh. You're using the same information in a different way. And it's that thing that then does light us up often and makes us feel more empowered, and realizing what limiting beliefs and ideas get in the way, whether they're conscious or not. And it can be a lot for people to kind of work through. But the bit I love about the astrology, so when I was teaching yoga, I used to talk about moon cycles. I said, look, regardless of whether you believe it or not, there are lots of things that influence us outside of our awareness that we don't know. And if you knew that when certain planets are in place, I think at the moment Mercury is in retrograde, you're more likely to feel slow, and you haven't got the same ideas, and you're not lighting up like a Christmas tree with creative ideas, and you're not spinning through all this work. As if you're creative, you tend to go through those cycles. It's okay to sit back and say, oh, I think I'll just stare out the window and ponder, or I'll go and tend to the garden, or I'll focus on my fitness or something else instead. Because actually, to try and push, I think Abraham Hicks used to talk about this a lot in the law of attraction. You like pushing against the tide rather than going with the tide. And the energies, as we know, the moon influences the water, and the water is in our body, and we feel this coming and going. So you start to get in tune with your own biorhythms, your own energetics, your own okay, I've just cleared and purged. You know, if you're worried about getting upset and crying about things that are triggered, well, we rarely cry all day. We might cry for an hour or 2 hours or feel miserable and want to eat Haagen-Dazs on the sofa all day and watch chick flicks, or, something that just we can support our soul and nourish ourselves. But then we allow ourselves to do that, and then we can get up the next day and tend to life again, and get busy and involved. But it's a lot for people to comprehend, and I guess the human design and the gene keys and the way that you work is, I think I saw, and I said earlier, that sort of three-step process of introducing yourself to the concept. Do you want to talk us through how you work if someone comes to see you, so that they can get a sense of what they might experience?
Yeah, I'd love to. So the first step always starts with pulling their free chart. That's where I tell everyone to start, whether they're like, I know I want to read it. I'm like, pull the chart, let's see. Simply because I give a lot of information after someone pulls their chart. I'll send them
Mhm.
a cheat sheet. I'll send them, a guide that actually is tailored towards their design. So it'll give tips on how to sleep best, how their immune system is designed, how do they handle overwhelm and pressure. And so it'll give
Um,
some tips there. It's like a 7-page ebook. I have a YouTube channel and I have a playlist devoted to human design. So I'm sending these things because I want you to really start to see how this fits into, what you already know about yourself, and
mhm,
what's something that you're like, this feels like it resonates, but let me try it. Like seeing what those things are for you, because by the time that they get to a reading with me, I want them to be like, okay, I've 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 played around, because I started giving like chat GPT prompts as well to help people like
mhm.
work with their design a little bit. And they're like, I've played around with it, I've done research on these things, and they're like, okay, I've got as far as I can go, and now I just need someone to help me put it together, right? Some people's go as far as I can go is deep. Some people's is just like I did these few things. No
Yeah.
matter. Level one is very much that foundation. We're really just talking about your type. So how is your energy configured? We're talking about your strategy, how are opportunities brought towards you, and we're talking a little bit about your authority. So how do you, once opportunities are brought to you, how do you in your body make decisions, because we've been conditioned to make decisions with our mind,
Mm.
and not tap into that intuition. Level two goes a little bit deeper. We start talking about all of those things in a deeper way, but we bring in your profile. We bring in the character role in your movie of life, and how does that play? Are you here to have a transpersonal journey? Are you here to have a very personal solitude journey? Are you here to be a bridge? And how does that show up for you? And then level three is like the deep dive. We're getting into the gates, we're getting into your incarnation cross, we're figuring out, that's where we're bringing in like grandparents charts, if you have them, to see how, like, what generational curses you might be,
Mm.
what generational patterns you might be trying to heal. And yeah, so depending on where they are, if they've had readings already, there's some language there that helps them choose and land. But that's really, that three-step process, those three levels of depth.
That's great, that you do it in those stages, because, as you said, it's a lot of information for people to work through and then see, oh, yeah, I do that. Oh, wow, yeah, I've noticed that. And I guess people's capacity to notice things really then increases, doesn't it? Like what you said
Yeah.
about your daughter, that all of a sudden they can see how things are playing out in their life. Any surprises in this work, since you started doing it?
The biggest surprises are just, and it doesn't even become a surprise at this point. It's just kind of like a joyful nod. I still love when people have never pulled their chart before and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is me." And I'm like, "I know, right?" Just imagine like everything you finding being like a little clue to like who you are. That's really the biggest surprise. There used to be things that surprised me in the beginning, but as I've done more readings, there are these nuances, there are these themes, especially because our charts actually tell us who we're designed to see and be around, they also give us insight into the wisdom that we're here to share with those people based off of our gifts. So it's going to be common that I'm going to see the same themes in the people that I help, because my gifts are here to help a certain set of people.
Interesting. Yeah. So, because we talked about sort of the parenting and the personal aspects of that, but in terms of business or people who are, there's a theme coming through my work, I've noticed certainly in the last few weeks, where they're kind of starting to sort of check into, is this what I really want to do? Do I want this career? Did I take the right path? What have I learned? You know, all that kind of sort of pondering. And I've introduced people, I sort of widen out their thinking in some way, but in terms of using these tools, have people come to you with, yeah, I'm in this corporate job, or I'm a farmer, or I'm doing, and I'm kind of considering moving in that direction. Have you had people come to you that when you've gone through these steps with them have totally shifted and gone down a completely different path? Or do they seem to gravitate more to what they were pondering on and they've just tweaked it? What's been your experience?
I do have people, like I have one person came to mind when you said that. She worked for the government. I do know a lot of corporate people, but they usually, because they're still deconditioning the corporate structure, human design usually doesn't really land initially unless they've already had that disruption, that life experience that's like
Mm,
a wake-up call. So
right.
usually it's entrepreneurs. I did have someone who I met at a networking event. She worked for the government. She was thinking about doing her business, and she ended up going in that direction. And I was just talking to her today because she's in my private community now. She's not a private one-to-one client anymore. She's in the community. And I was like, she hadn't been to a couple of meetings because she's been in London. Then she had her birthday. I'm like, hey, what's going on? And she's like, things are really picking up because the government, with all these government shutdowns, like people, she's a career coach. She helps people with their
Oh,
resumes and
okay.
like that part. And so she's like, business consulting has been good. She's got a contract at a school and people are about to graduate, so they're looking for a career consultation in that way. And I'm like, aren't you glad? Because when she first came, she was like, yeah, I think maybe in like a year and a half I'll really huckle down on my business. I'll just stay here and try and do both. And then disruption happened, and obviously that didn't. But it's usually the entrepreneur who, the biggest thing, and this is why I think I got confused at the beginning and why I'm so clear on my messaging now. The biggest thing that I used to market to was, you want more clients, because the business people thought that it was just their marketing, it was their messaging, it was their, it was the system, it was like something outside
Yeah.
of them that
Yeah.
was not bringing the clients in. And as I learned that that's not the case myself, as I got more aligned, it started to become clearer and clearer to me that it was like, okay, these three areas. But usually it's business owners or people who want to start their own business. They have a lot of ideas and they're like, what do I do? What am I doing wrong? It's actually less, what do I do? Those are for the people starting out. It's more so, what am I doing wrong? And that's why I
Mm,
love so much human design as a tool, because there's so many aha moments where it's like, I'm not doing anything wrong. I just learned from a teacher who taught me this way, and
yeah.
I just clung to it. And now I'm seeing all these possibilities of how I can actually show up. And I'm like, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And isn't that lovely when you see that somebody expands out of that perception? Because especially if you've had a difficult time at school because you either had some kind of condition, as we know, more adults are being diagnosed with ADHD now. I mean, I'm out on the jury in that, in terms of, I think there's a few things going on with that, but the challenging experience that they had trying to be in the system to understand what was being conveyed, or just not being resonating with that topic at all, which was most of my experience at school, of just not feeling it, Two things I really loved, which I in the end only went to, was music and social studies. And what did I become? I got involved with working in government services alongside social workers and offering mental health services, So And that's the thing, is sometimes our gifts can manifest in different ways. And a discovery sort of I became more aware of a few years ago is the whole idea of, what am I going to do? Am I going to carry on doing this job forever? Da, da, da. Started to happen to me around 2016. And it was when I first decided, I thought, I'm going to set up a website. I want to write a blog. I started writing a blog, but I've got some level of dyslexia. So it was painstaking. Then I got people to edit it and do this and do that. And then when COVID kicked in and everything went online and we were using Zoom every minute of the day, and we got more comfortable being on the camera, we started using videos. The idea of having to write things out all the time, or even now it writes it out for you, you have a transcript. And then I was starting to do podcasts and the same thing. And then I thought, well, I can do the blog through video. I can either spend 2 weeks having to try and reshape it and do something different with it, or just record it and then connect that, what's happening in the moment, with the concept. Because by the time you spent so much time on a blog, you've moved on from the issue and you're processing something new. And then, as you say, ChatGPT comes along and there's all sorts of opinions out there about that. And I was saying to a couple of clients the other day, that what I'm able to do now is I can work through what we call stream of consciousness. I can download everything that I'm pondering on. And then I'll say to ChatGPT, what themes are emerging through here? And can you shape it up for me? Can you make it look like a blog or a sales ad or a talk or something? And then it gives something back. And then I ponder on it. And now we have the feedback loop. And we go back to the original parent role of parenting. Is the feedback loop. You put something out there, you get some response to it, it comes back, you digest it, you ponder on it. And that beautiful part of the creative process, once you open your mind to the new possibilities, you open yourself up to life and experience in ways that I couldn't even have predicted when I was 18 what I was going to be doing at 21. And when I started retraining for this, I think I was 27 when I went into psychology and therapy. And I only took a 6-week course. I didn't take a 4-year diploma. I couldn't even, when you come from certain backgrounds, you don't do that. You can't even envisage it. So you just have to take the first step. So each time it's like you take the first step, you have that experience. Do you like it? Do you love it? Do you not? And then you go, you be the scientist in your own journey. Like you said, you like to, use the science. And then you see how that expands. And does that light you up and give you a good feeling? And do you enjoy it? And do you want to keep doing that? Or does it shut you down and give you a different experience? And in a way, that process of how I cycle through stuff now has helped me get better and better at this. And yet I still have, like what you were saying, I still have these things that are triggered because now I've got a granddaughter, so I've got a new person in the system, the family system, as well as the things that we're triggered from outside. Because I'm actually delighted that the whole of education is going to break down and shift, because I worked with lots of kids in schools whose mental health was a direct result of being in school. Not because of the parents were on drugs and had alcohol issues. That was hard enough in many cases. But lots of kids who were sorted, fairly healthy, got bullied or bullied by the teachers, or were in the wrong class, or not supported and promoted. So if all of that changes, I'm absolutely delighted, and I'll help them reconstruct the new ones, and we'll bring in all of these different concepts so that children are more empowered from a much earlier age, like what you were saying, so that we can help parents feel empowered, so that when their children are generating their own identity, we don't feel threatened, we don't feel disempowered, we don't feel, because that's the thing we want to create. We don't want to create more generational trauma. We're trying to clear that up, and we want to create more capacity to be open to actually the uncertainty. And I think when we first started talking, you said you've now transported into this. Who am I and what have I been doing? Well, we live in an uncertain world, and you're helping people embrace that uncertainty and understand themselves as to how they can then navigate that uncertainty.
Yes, it's one of those things where It's the simplest thing sometimes. Like I've been looking at like what's in my Mercury. I have 15, which is the gate of extremes, which basically says I'm going to create patterns and routines that will be disrupted and I will have to begin again. And then
Oh,
in my 50, in the other Mercury gate on my conscious side is as the 51, I believe. And that's the gate of shock, initiation. And so that also says that I will go through cycles of disruption, and those cycles of disruption will bring me closer in alignment to source. And
wow.
I'm looking at these gates and I'm looking at these entrepreneurs in my messaging. And I'm like, how do I talk about the 15 and the 51 in my marketing? I don't know. Like, right? I'm like literally thinking about it so hard. And then as I stopped making that my focus and I started healing these other things, it was like, oh, uncertainty. Oh, uncertainty in business. Oh, uncertainty in life. Oh, uncertainty in parenting. Right?
Yeah.
So much uncertainty. And I was like, duh. And immediately, right? And chat being there for us is like, hey, everything we talked about, I'm having this new realization now. Can you help me connect the themes? And it's
Oh,
like, boom, boom,
amazing.
boom. And I'm like, this is it. This is the one. And like, there's that part of me in my design that's like, but you felt this way before. And I'm like, no, but really though, this time it's like to me. Like before, I just kind of got a little piece and I tried
Yeah.
to shortcut my way there. And it's like, but you have to have that belief. And so that's it's work, but I feel really good.
And that's the point, isn't it? Is whatever you're doing, you feel really good, your energy is high, you can go with the flow as well as be aware of how those disruptions come in and you go, oh, it's another one of it's another one of those. Okay. I'll get through it because
Right.
I'm a Taurus and I like, even going back to my fitness routine, my brain's starting to do the same thing as what it did 20 years ago when I started back in the gym. And I get so far and I've got to do this routine. And I'm like, so I have to talk to myself with that new knowledge and go, stop it, Mel, because that's how you ended up burnt out that time. And you don't need to go to the gym. I'm having this argument with myself. You don't have to go for 50 minutes and work this way. And the other part of me is like going, you have to, and I'm like, no, because actually you can train for 2 minutes and increase your load and have this experience. So it doesn't necessarily, I guess what I'm saying is we're not a finished product. We're just getting better and better at moving through those things that we've known for a long time. And I find there's a psychology model, therapy model called psychosynthesis. And what I said to clients is you can be moving along, and things settle. Enjoy the peace, enjoy the respite, especially if you've had chaos or your kids are sick and all that. Enjoy the respite when you've got it 24 hours. Take it, don't feel it, have it. And then something comes along. And in psychosynthesis, what they say is there's a spiral and it comes down into the shadow and it goes, and you go, and you you feel it, and either you respond and you want to argue or you want to have a typical response because it's still fire, it's fire that's been activated, and then it comes up and like what you're saying is you pull yourself together and you go, oh, I'll get back in, for me anyway, I'll get back into my hippie moment. And what is this? This beautiful dusty shiny gift now that's come up. What is this taught me? And it's fascinating because with clients, as you shift, they shift too. And
Mhm.
sometimes they shift, then you shift, and you learn about that symbiotic nature, don't you, of this process. And then there's something that's quite delicious about that. And you're like, wow, you know, you discovered that, and I'm discovering that through you. Like what you say, you're discovering something in this moment, and I'm discovering something
Yeah.
with you. And my brain is going, because as you were talking, I could see all these pieces coming into like the pizza pie, and it's like you're pulling in, and in I think in shamanism they talk about, is that like calling back soul fragments as
Mm,
well,
yeah.
these aspects of ourselves that we give away because every time and I can only relate it to women because my clients 99% of the time have
Yeah.
been women. But every time we didn't speak up, every time we swallowed our feelings, every time we dealt with a situation and couldn't deal with it in a certain way or whatever, a part of that, our soul was left there. And sometimes we have to get to this place in life where to call back the energy as well is calling back those aspects of ourselves. And so I say to people, imagine go lie on your bed, do some deep breathing, and imagine that you've walked into a stadium, and in the stadium are all the people you've ever come into contact with, where you've given something away of yourself because you were caring and only ever projecting outwards, and say to them, right, I'm calling back this energy in this line from everyone, and I'm pulling that back into my system, and whatever happens after that is you're retaining that essence and energy for yourself. And it doesn't mean to say you don't do nice things and give and all of that, but there's just something, I don't know why that came to me as we were talking, because it's not, I don't talk about that sort of shamanism, and stuff like that often.
Yeah.
But,
No, that's intriguing because it actually gives more meaning to a song that plays on one of my playlists. One of the things that I like to do is I listen to affirmation music that's put to like regular beats and things like that. So,
yeah,
and there's a song where she talks about, I call my power back, and she goes into like all of these affirmations about her calling her power back. And it's like, I get it, but like, I don't know, your download helps give it another level of meaning to the I
yeah,
get it of like,
yeah.
oh, okay. I'm looking forward to actually listening with intention the next time that song decides to play.
I get, yeah, because it's the layers of understanding, isn't it? I know
Yeah.
that lady, what's she called? The
Oh,
singer.
it's like Joy and Soul or something like that.
Yeah, I think I've heard her on it
Yeah. Yeah.
on Instagram. Yeah, yeah. And I heard her say that, and I thought, oh wow, that it sounds very shamanic. That idea of working with the energetics on that level.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of bringing these different models together, is that, and again going back to, and I feel like I have to emphasize, our mental health is massively impacted on our well-being because we're giving out like this all the time, and we always hold our not personality, hold our authentic nature, hold these facets of ourselves that need life, that need expression through dance, through music, through poetry, through the clients that you work with, through architecture, through whatever way they need to be expressed. As you said about your mom, and you're able to do that now, you're able to recognize that and help other people also connect with that, so that flow and that expression occurs.
Yeah. Yes. And it's such a beautiful practice of compassion as well. Cause it just, even when I think about my mom, there are moments where that angry teenager in me gets triggered. And she's just like, right, every time I think I've healed like all parts of whatever I thought she did to me in my childhood before I was removed from her care, I'm like, I think I'm okay. And then I learned something else that's holding me back in a way that I don't even know. And it's very easy to be like, "Oh, this is why I don't like you. This is why. This is why we don't talk." And then that compassion sets in of like, we are all only doing the best that we can with
Yeah,
the information and the awareness that we have in that moment. And there were times where I had to like do that with like learning stuff with reparenting with Taylor, like making myself wrong for like co-sleeping and learning that, during that first 7 years, the soul is still really deciding if it wants to be here. And so
yeah,
sometimes with some children, having that energetic connection to their parents can be so helpful later on in life. But I remember, right, the information I had at the time was don't co-sleep. It makes them clingy. It makes them, not as independent as they could be. All of these things. And I was so proud. I was like, she's sleeping on her own. Yes. And then
yeah,
now I'm seeing how if we would have just co-slept a little bit more, if she would have just, osmosed
naturally.
some of my compassion and my empathy, like we would be in a different spot now. And to have like mom guilt, mom shame in that first moment of like, oh my God, I messed up my child. And I thought that I
Mm,
was actually doing something good for her, but I may have been, right? And catching myself in that loop of like, you were literally doing the best that you could. You did
Exactly.
so much research on co-sleeping. Like you were only you didn't know about the spiritual side of things. You didn't know about all of these things. And so that's where one of my gifts, actually the SQ, the spiritual quotient that triggers the EQ and the IQ, is grace. It's the shadow of dishonor into the gift of graciousness, and at its highest frequency is grace. And I had to not dishonor myself in that moment, and I
Yeah.
had to give myself that grace.
Yeah. It's it takes a lot to be able to entertain all of that that's going on, isn't it? Because often, you know, like you said, you're trying your best. And sometimes that's almost like the danger of information is we learn all this stuff and we think we're doing the right thing at that time. And then afterwards we look at it through a different lens. And so that self-compassion is so needed, because the more you learn about yourself and the more you learn about these models, there is that fear of, oh my God, I'm going to screw my child up and they're going to be unhappy. And so we've got to feel that self-compassion and honor that, as you say, and honor that feeling that we have that maybe we've screwed up or whatever. And also be able to put it in context, you know, that they also have their own journey. And so not every misdemeanor or issue that we have with them is actually something that's going to scar them. It's because one of the gifts that we give our children is by acknowledging and validating when they come to us and say what they think and feel about something, even if it's harsh and it hurts, and we can hear that and we take that on board, and we don't minimize, and we don't, what we're now using the term gaslight, you know, or the parents forget, or no, that didn't happen. And that was very common early on 20 years ago, when people were going to psychotherapy and they'd go, I can talk about, you know, these things now, I'm going to go and see my parents. And Ram Dass, who I was trying to remember the name of earlier, who was the clinical
Yeah.
psychologist in the 60s that went to India, he says, if you think you're healed, you know, and you're going to your, you know, your weekend or your ashrams and you're doing your
Mhm.
yoga and your meditation, go and spend a weekend with your family.
Right.
You
Yep.
think you're healed, you know, and then all the stuff about what is really coming up for you. And
Yeah.
it's harsh. It's tough work. It is tricky to move out of whatever that pain and rage and hurt and anger is that's there. And then, like you say, that double whammy, if you've got your own children and you want them to grow up, I don't know, happy, healthy, satisfied human beings. Because what are we trying to do?
Yeah.
And they've got their journey, and that's quite tough, because then we realize we're only human and we're not God, or we're not source, we're not whatever it is that exists outside of us that has created this universe that we exist in, because we're just really looking after them for a certain amount of time, aren't we? You know, we're just shaping them to a certain degree, and then they go out into the world and we want to help them, protect them. And I think what you've said really demonstrates the amount of nonsense information that has been given to parents over the years, that at our most vulnerable, anxious time, during and after our first child, of what is right and wrong, and learning to tune into going, well, they're going to sleep in my bed. That's okay. And, you know, and then other people's opinions and judgments about how you live your life and what is right and wrong. And it's a hell of a lot, I think, for parents. I always had a soft spot for parents, one being one, but how hard all that was. And I used to go to school meetings and they'd want me to work with a parent of a particular child because they had this issue, whatever it was. And I remember once in one school, the teachers saying, and you know, they don't even have a table to do their homework. I was like, neither do I. You know, I lived in a small house. But to me, that was not an issue, you know. But they made that as though that was a psychological
Yeah.
damaging thing. And
Yeah.
the reason that they had issues in school was
Yeah.
they weren't sat around the table doing the homework, you know. And I looked at her, and sometimes you have to look at people, and part of me goes, what? The other part is, I'm just not even going to try and educate you on why that is such a stupid statement.
Yeah.
Because in the scheme of things, you know, the fact that where I was growing up, you had a roof over your head and you could have some heating on, and you weren't freezing like anything in winter, and you didn't have 10 people with one pot of food, you know, those kind of things. And that's the thing, we were always comparing and contrasting, aren't we, and putting our perspective and spin on it. So yeah, fundamentally, and I love what you said, is you have to have that self-compassion and that grace with yourself. And we don't talk about that enough. We don't emphasize that enough. And I think that's, in a way, the part of therapy that some do it, some don't. We need to be helping people understand. You work for all this stuff, but you can't go back and go, when I was little and you did that and you did that, in a blaming, angry way. We've got to be able to see it through the eyes, even in severe neglect. You know, people have all sorts of histories that have done something to their brain, and trauma sometimes for some people has totally screwed up their capacity to even give the basics to their kids. And it's hard to witness, and it's hard to know about. But I know when I worked alongside social services, most of the parents that were known to social service were trying to do their best. And actually, most of the women that were known to social services were involved with them because they were in domestic abuse relationships. Were they in domestic abuse relationships because they grew up with domestic abuse? That's what they knew. They grew up with trauma, and they used alcohol and drugs to cope with the pain and the disillusionment, and the fact that they had got really entrenched in that situation. And we saw the kind of things that help people at different levels of society. So we have to take that understanding and that grace with us, at the same time saying what's okay and not okay for us as well. But before we end today, is there anything that you would like to share that you haven't yet about the human design, the gene keys, yourself, or your work, that we can guide people to your website and take up your beautiful offer? Because I think it sounds brilliant what you offer people.
I appreciate you. The last thing that I'll say that I didn't mention is the limit doesn't exist. Fear and self-doubt will make you believe it does. And the more that we can get in there and we can get aware, that we can build that emotional resilience, that we can make those conscious choices of when something happens in our environment and how we react. Like that space is where these tools help so much. And so I just want to encourage you just to get curious. That's really all I can ask for, because I get curious about lots of things. You've talked about, people dynamics and right, some stuff I'm like, ooh, I wonder what their energy is like, because what would be going on there? But like you said, it's that discernment of
Yeah.
like, yes, I'm curious, and is this worth the energy of trying to find this person and then get their information? And like, no, it's not. But it's just the curiosity. And so many people, they get uncomfortable because curiosity inherently is uncertainty.
Yeah. Stepping in and just exploring and seeing what happens and unfolds. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So just get curious. Just get curious.
Yeah. It's also what helps us connect more with joy and life satisfaction, is that curiosity of
Yeah.
what's outside of what I think, what I know, what I've done. And certainly people who start to do that, is that then takes the brain, in the psychology side of it, is the brain gets into a state of safety and security and homeostasis. And either we're shook up, or we go into a new place or a new space and experience novelty and wonder, and that re-triggers and reactivates things and makes new connections. And I think we hinted towards it earlier because it is quite deep. If you look at the gene keys, is not only are you reading and processing the information and making connections, the gene keys themselves are activating the systems within the body. And I think that's something I discovered with the human design, whether it is a business relationship, a partnership, a parent, is sometimes we need to come in contact with certain people because, and I'm maybe getting this wrong, one open gate needs to meet the other gate so
Yeah.
that there's an activation that takes place.
Yeah. And you don't even always have to know it. And that's funny because like there are times where I'll do Uber share because I'm like, I wonder whose energy I'm supposed to absorb today.
Okay.
What little gift am I gonna energetically match in them that they might even need? So yes, there are gates that kind of reach out for others if we don't have definition there already.
So the final message is for the hermits, for the people who for the last 3 or 4 years, the entrepreneurs, the spiritualists, the ones that are sort of tuning into what is going on at the moment, who have spent a lot of time indoors, who are getting, and me included to some degree, to sort of safe and secure there, is we need to get out and be curious, because actually when we're in these energetic spaces, even if we're not having conversations with people, they are either sampling our energy or we're sampling theirs, and we don't have to lock our energy down and people worried about people stealing it. This is an alchemic process that takes place regardless of whether we are in the co-op or Asda, what is it, Target, I think it, or whatever
Yeah.
supermarket it is. We come into contact with people and we experience something, and the more we work towards experiencing peace and calm and flow, the easier it is to notice it at each phase of our day-to-day. Oh, that's interesting. I now feel like this now I'm talking to this person, or I feel like doing this, or I do this. And you can tune into each moment at each phase. That builds up your confidence to cope with, well, I don't know what to expect today or this
Yeah.
week or with life. But I think it's beautiful what you're doing as well in terms of helping people now with careers and the uncertainty that's out there, because we know that there are massive shifts going on. And also, as a positive, as much as people are losing their jobs, and there are some jobs I believe no human should be doing, that it's not going to make them feel happy and excited for their life. And so we're driving towards this idea that we don't need to be working 40 hours a week. In fact, if we could just work in more flow a few hours a day and do the other things that we used to do in tribes and communities that work for us, that this phase also means is that we've more capacity now to tap into these new ways of bringing in some kind of money or resources to us. And so coming and having conversations with people like yourself can activate that process, inspire and create some hope. And if anything we need in the universe at the moment is more hope, inspiration, joy and happiness. And I know that we're not always going to feel like that. We're going to have those other days, but part of that process. And so I wish you well on your journey. And I know we're going to keep in contact because I absolutely love what you're doing. So thank you for your time here. And there's a possibility there'll be part 2 to this, because I think there's a whole load of angles we could go down.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.